Okay, go ahead and do that, and I'll get started if you wish. Okay, so today we're going to cover CRM upgrade practices and procedures that I've kind of developed over the past few years because I've done a lot of upgrades from one version of CRM to the other, and they're always kind of interesting because they're all different. But there are some basic things that you can kind of follow along with that will work every single time, and take that as a basis, and then of course your mileage will vary. So let's get into this. So my name is Mitch Milam. I am a Dynamics CRM architect and an independent consultant. I'm a nine-time Dynamics CRM MVP. You can contact me at Mitch at XRM Coaches. My main blog for right now is at infinite-x.net. And, of course, I'm on Twitter at Mitch Milam. Okay, very good. Okay, this is part of my Teaching Tuesdays. So again, I've just come up with a series of things that I like to talk about that I do on a fairly regular basis, and I thought I would just share that information with you guys. I did have a Google Moderator site up that allowed you to put new content in and vote things up. That is closed since they discontinued the service. So if you have any ideas for things you want to see in the next few months, then please let me know. I do have one webinar I'll email everybody out today coming up on the 2nd of October. Dealing with training and some tips and tricks for getting your user acceptance up by training your people. As always, any of these webinars can be viewed after the recordings are up, which will be later today for this one, at xrmcoaches.com/webinar. So you'll see the upcoming webinars that I have along with any of the recorded webinars and just pointed to my YouTube channel. So today we're going to discuss the upgrade process flow. I'm going to start at the very beginning. So I know a lot of you are not going to be this far, but a lot of this actually applies. But we're going to start at the beginning with CRM 4.0 and then move up through CRM 2015 and talk about all the things, because a lot of people may be on a specific version of CRM, but they still have CRM 4 things installed in the system that will prevent upgrades to, say, 2015, for instance. So we're going to talk about all those, but I'm going to start at the very beginning because I think it's important to kind of go through the whole process so you can figure out where you want to do stuff. So the way that this works, and I don't think this is going to change with the release of 2016, which is coming out here in the fall sometimes, is you have to go from one version to the other. There's no way to go from, say, 2011 to 2015 or from 4.0 to 2013 or anything in between. You have to jump one step ahead at a time. So what this means is you're going to have to build up environments that will allow you to move the database, the organizational database, from one platform to the other, upgrade it, back it up, move it to the next, etc. So this is where virtual machines really and truly shine, right here, where you can spin up these things, use them for a few months, and then decommission them. So again, if you're going from 4.0, you have to go to 2011. Then you have to go to 2013, and finally you have to go to 2015. And it's, like I said, I'm assuming 2016 will be no different than it is right now. So for those of us who have customers on 2013, we're going to have to get them to 2015, and then we can actually move them to 2016 when that comes out. Now, moving from 2013 to 15 is not that much of a traumatic change because the user interface is in there. Really what you have to worry out what's for is legacy code at this point, and 2016 should not be that big a deal. The biggest change for everybody, of course, was the shift from 2011 to 2013 because of the user interface paradigm shift. So that is the one that causes us all the pain, and that's the one that you're going to spend most of your time educating your users on. So for this discussion, again, I'm going to make an assumption that we started with 4.0 or something like that, and you're either on 4.0 or on 27. So this is, again, an on-premise discussion because if you're on CRM Online, then you're probably at least on 2015 of some variation. I think just about everywhere in the world that's the way the case is. If I'm mistaken, then please tell me. So the first consideration of all of this is, do you start with a copy of production or do you just take a backup and jump to the next upgrade step? That really kind of depends on what you're going to have to do. So a lot of times it's actually easier to make a copy of a production environment, build up an entire virtual machine on that environment. So say if we're on 4.0, we build up a new 4.0 environment, import the data, and then we'll work on that because there's a lot of cleanup operations that really need to happen as they stand. So before you start migrating things, because anytime you do the migration, you're going to go through processes that take hours or longer to complete. So as clean as we can get the environment and moving these files around, the better off everybody will be. So again, this is kind of consideration number one. Do we duplicate production, or are we satisfied, or can we make the cleanup in production enough to where we can just make a backup and then start with the next revision up? Okay. The single biggest concern that you're going to have with all of this is, what in the world do we do with a third-party solutions? Now, if we're on 2011 and we started on 2011, we have the solution model. If we started on 4.0, we do not have the solution model. So it's more difficult to extract someone's code and data out of a CRM installation if you have 4.0 or if you came from 4.0 than it is if you started off with the solution model, because solutions can be hopefully migrated. It really depends. There's a lot to consider in there that's kind of beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. But this always has to be at the top of your plan there. So if you do have a third-party ISV that you can work with to figure out what would be the best way to move their solution from one version of CRM to the other, then you need to engage them if at all possible. Sometimes that's not a possibility because of what the solution is. Maybe it's an open source thing, maybe it's a community thing, whatever it might be. So it's one of these things you just kind of have to kind of play with until you figure out what the best way to handle it would be. So the first step of all this is the environmental preparation. So again, we create one virtual machine for each type of environment we have. Now, your final environment can actually be your new production environment. So in most cases, when you're moving up the chain from, say, 4.0 or 2011 up to 2015, you're going to have to upgrade the operating system and the SQL Server, because at that point in time, the requirements have shifted. So we can't install CRM 2015 on a Windows 2008 server. It won't work. Nor can we use SQL Server 2008. We have to go with the 2012 versions of everything as a minimum. So those things kind of change. So your final test environment for your 2015 server can actually be your final production server, because nobody's going to be on it until we actually start moving the data over. So that's a possibility. But, as a side, what you can do is you can create a virtual machine for your testing and upgrade process for your 2015, and just use that as your development server after you've gone to production with the 2015. So again, you create your virtual machines, one for each environment you need, install the appropriate version of CRM, then install any additional software that you might need to do whatever you're going to do. Make a backup of your production database. That's step 2, fairly obvious there. And again, you can restore it into a duplicate of production or into the next version up. So if we started with CRM 4.0 and we're going to 2011, we would take the backup from 4.0, put it on the 2011 machine, and restore it and start the process from there. So the first thing I like to do is clean up all the old junk, because there's going to be a lot usually, because most people don't maintain their async operations table, as you've probably realized. I think there's a lot of consultants on the call here today, and I know all of us have run into production issues because the async operation base table has gotten too big and it's got millions of rows in it, and nobody can work in CRM because of that. Okay, so first thing is clean up the async operation table. There are SQL scripts out there. If anybody wants to let me know, and maybe I'll include that on the list there. So hang on one second, please. Terribly sorry about that. I'm dealing with a cold today, if you can't tell. Okay, so clean that up, and then if you're using the Outlook client will create a synchronization table for each Outlook being synced. So there are scripts out there to clean those up as well, and that just kind of helps clean things up. I also like to perform a database shrink operation on the database, strictly because when you start moving a several gigabyte file from one server to the other server, it does take a certain amount of time. So, a lot of databases have nothing in them. Because they've expanded and contracted, and the space in between is mostly empty, but still takes up space on disk. So, by performing a database shrink operation, we can make that smaller so that when we move that file between the additional servers, it doesn't take that long. Now, again, you're talking about a few minutes, but if you have network issues or you've got bandwidth constraints or something like that, it could actually end up affecting your ability to perform quite a bit. Okay, step 4 is to actually perform the first upgrade. So again, assuming 4.0 to 2011, You move the backup over and store it into SQL. Then use the deployment manager to import the database. That actually does the migration itself, and that's true for all of the environments, no matter what you're having. Then you go and correct any conditions that could have prevented an upgrade. So when you do the upgrade of the database itself, there will be an environmental check that is performed, and that environmental check will actually look at things in the database to see if there's anything that's going to prevent the upgrade from completing successfully. If it is, it will stop and not let you continue. So you fix anything like that in the database, and then at that point you can actually perform the upgrade, okay, or the import in this case. Now, sometimes one of the reasons that I mentioned creating a duplicate of your production database is because sometimes you actually have to make corrections to the SQL Server database itself based on maybe something you did one time to fix a problem. It's quite common, as I'm sure all the people who work with the CRM on-premise know, it's very common for you to have to go and modify the database to fix things sometimes. Technically, in many cases, it's not actually supported, but when you got to get a job done, you got to get a job done, and we all know that. So sometimes that end result is CRM gets very upset with what we've done, and it will give you an error, will not continue. So we have to go fix that. So fixing in production is, as we know, quite scary. So if you can fix it in your duplicate, that helps a whole lot. And all you got to do is document what you did so that when you start the process over for real, you do the same thing again. So assuming that we've corrected all of our environmental issues, we perform the upgrade, and then what I like to do is just make a backup right as soon as it's finished upgrading, make a backup just so you have a snapshot. So that's just a good best practice. I actually got kind of burned by that last week because I didn't do that because it had fallen off my list and I was in a hurry. So note to self. Okay, so consideration number 2. So we're about to get into the coding aspects of your upgrade. You cannot perform an upgrade without having your code and source control, okay? If you don't have source control, get source control. You can get Visual Studio Online for up to 5 users for free, okay? Do that. It is worth the money, okay? And actually, it's worth more than the money. But you cannot actually do an upgrade without having some way to reference the original source code. So there's tools out there that I'll point you to pull the JavaScript or whatever it might be out of CRM so you can modify it and then put it back in. And it's also just really good to have some kind of integrated issue tracking thing. So it's either going to be, I use TFS myself. You also use GitHub for a few things, depending on the project and then the customer, etc. So this, I don't think I can emphasize this enough, but it's really required that you have source control because you will make mistakes when you're modifying your code, and this is the way you get around having the mistakes. Okay, so the JavaScript cleanup may or may not have happened when you move from 4 to 2011 to 2013. So there's still a lot of code that's around that uses the CRM 4.0 object model. It worked in 2011 just fine as long as you're using IE. When you went to 2013, some things kind of sort of worked, and they don't work at all in 2015. So you're going to have to modify. So you have to convert the object model. So that's the first thing. And then you have to remove unsupported code. So there's a lot of code out there that is just blatantly just can't be supported in the newer environments. It was not even supported in the environment you created it in. The second thing is any calls that you have to the CRM 4.0 endpoint, which was the one that had the word 2007 in the middle of it. These environmental checks that I mentioned earlier will actually check for those things in both your .NET code and your JavaScript. If it sees them, it will actually fail the upgrade and you won't be able to continue. So anything that you're using where you're actually making web service calls to do things like create records or perform retrieve operations or things like that, those have to be upgraded. So if you get all that stuff cleaned up, now this would be a really good time to make any architectural changes. So a lot of people have CRM systems that have been around for quite a while, and as I'll mention later on, the business that you started with when you had, say, CRM 4 2011 may not be the business you have today, and changes were made along the way to kind of facilitate the migration of the business from one point in space to the other. And a lot of times your CRM system is kind of fighting to keep up with that. So now would be a good time for you to make any changes you need. Okay, so if you have something that doesn't work quite the way that you want, this is the time to change it, because this seems like a minor thing. Oh, we're just going to convert our JavaScript. Okay, that's fine, except you got 12,000 lines. Now what are you doing? Okay. So now is the time for you to look at the way you're doing things and see if there's a better way to do it. You're going to be making code changes anyway, so now is the time for you to actually budget for that change to happen, because in all honesty, you probably might not get a chance to do this again. So again, now is the time for this. So with the link at the bottom, it's off my CRM Accelerator's website, is a list of articles I've written. It has a list of tools. Like, for instance, I have a JavaScript converter that converts the object model from CRM 4.0 to the 2011 format, which is used from 2011 on up. So that's a commercial product. There are one or two free things that you can download to help you with that. They don't do exactly the same thing, but they're available. There's also other tools and things. So that page has everything that I've ever found to help you upgrade both your JavaScript and your .NET and the whole system. So lots of articles that I wrote about things I discovered while I was upgrading things as I was writing my Transformer tool as well. So that's a good resource for you. So make a snapshot of that URL and you can get it. It's also, if you go out to crmaccelerators.net, it's actually one of the top level menu items on the page. So it's always there. Okay, so the .NET code cleanup, in all honesty, is worse than the JavaScript cleanup because there are no tools really available for this. Now, like I said, I wrote a tool called Transformer to convert the JavaScript format from 4.0 to 2011 for the JavaScript piece, but there's really nothing out there to help you with the .NET code cleanup, and it is absolutely a tremendous amount of work. So what I did, I've got this free tool. It's called the CRM.let Migrator tool, and what it does is it actually uses macros within Visual Studio to do a search and replace to convert things from the 4.0 object model into the 2011/2013 and above object model. Now, the only caveat to that is Microsoft, in their infinite wisdom, removed the macro facility from Visual Studio 2012 and above. So if you want to use that tool, you have to use Visual Studio 2010. But quite honestly, for the amount of work it will save you, it may be worth it. So take a look at that. But the idea here, if you have plugins or custom web pages, I know I've wrote a lot of custom ASP.NET web pages for customers to fit into their system to add additional functionality. We have custom integration, either Windows services we wrote, or some kind of custom integration between a legacy system and CRM. All those things, everything has to be modified, and it is a night and day change. So all the code has to be replaced, and it's a good thing actually. It's a lot of work, and it's extremely painful and can be costly. But the thing is, you will end up with a code set that is better prepared for the future. Okay, so what really happened with all this is when CRM first shipped, the version of .NET that they wrote in didn't support nullable data types. So in order to write a null to the database, which is how you erase a value of a field, they had to construct special classes for that, like CRM number, and you actually specified, oh, this is a null. And when it saw that, it actually wrote a null to the database. And that doesn't seem like a big deal, but those were extra things we had to do. So in moving up into the higher levels of .NET that gave us nullable data types and a few of the other facilities, they took all that stuff out. So they went from having one custom data class for every type of data to having just three, which are money, option set, and entity reference. And so basically what happens is we have to change all of those references. We have to change references to pretty much every single piece of thing we've ever worked with. And it's just a lot of manual labor. There's just no way around it. And if you got a lot of .NET code, then this will be a good time for you to clean it up. Like I said, I created that migrator tool, and again, all it is a series of macros, but it cleans up all of the things that you would have to do by hand, and then it has another thing where it will actually go and modify it will create a series of macros based on your metadata, to where it will actually search and replace your variable names, because what happens, all of those changed as well. So like I said, it is a lot of work, and so if you have any plugins or custom workflow activities or anything like that, then this is going to be a big sticking point too. So just don't walk into it blindly. Step number 7. This should be obvious, but it is a lot of testing, a lot of testing. So, for instance, if we started off with 4.0, what I like to do is I like to do all of the actual cleanup and conversion work on 2011. And the reason is because that system is as close as we can get to 4.0 without going back to 4.0. So the user interface still works the same. You know, we have the ribbon instead of the toolbar, so that's a little bit different, but not too terribly different. But the look and feel of everything works exactly the same. So what I do is I like to clean up everything in that environment because we're not making that paradigm shift to the 2013 interface. And if we get everything cleaned up to where it works in 2011, it will work going forward to a greater or lesser degree. Okay, so do it in that as far as possible. Compare it with the original functionality and make sure that everything's working. And then once you get everything working on 2011, then you can start the progression going upwards. So this is the process we will use from here on out. So we back up the 2011 database, restore it to the 2013 server, import it using Deployment Manager. Again, we're going to have environmental checks on the database to make sure that everything is copacetic. Assuming it is, we complete the import and again back up the database just to make sure we have a point. At this point in time is where we actually go and do the testing to look for the differences in the user interface between CRM 2011 and 2013. One of the common ones that we used to do is we would say we have an account open and we opened a child contact. Well, that account window is still open on the screen. So we actually use JavaScript to pull account information off of that parent window and push it into some kind of field or some kind of display on the contact record. Well, the way that the 2013/2015 interface works is we don't have that ability anymore because we're actually replacing one record with another record. So code like that will no longer work and has to be replaced. So anything where we're using code like that, we have to watch for. So we have to verify all your screens, make sure your JavaScript is not producing errors, make sure your plugins and your other integration is working. I mentioned the .NET stuff earlier. If you have ASP.NET pages that are in the ISV folder, they're not officially supported anymore, but they work still. Okay, they didn't remove the functionality, they just don't support it anymore. So what that means is, and we'll get to 2015, it's a really big deal because what happens is if they see code in your ISV folder, it will stop it will fail the environmental check. So you have to literally move it out of the ISV folder, and then after you upgrade, put it back where it was. It's kind of silly, but it works. So again, 2013, you're really truly testing the differences in user interface and functionality between 2011 and 2013. Okay, so do that there. Again, this is a secondary level of checks because this is going to be different than the 2011 stuff. So just to kind of be aware of that. So migration of 2015, again, same exact procedure, back up to 2013, restore to 2015, import it, fix any issues, complete the import, back up the database. And again, more testing. So this is our final level of testing. So everything that we do here has to be done correctly, because if we expose users to this and we have problems, then that's just going to make for a long day, or more likely a long series of days. So test the differences between 2013 and 2015. There are really not that many to my knowledge. It mostly performs exactly the same way as far as the user interface paradigm is. Again, verify your JavaScript just to make sure, verify the .NET code, which lets your plugins, etc. And at this point is where I actually start testing the integration if we need to. So that could be installing the email router for testing, maybe the Outlook client. It really kind of depends on what level you want to do. If you have some kind of, like you have Scribe that integrates between CRM and GP, maybe you do it at that point. Again, whatever you need to do to test your final production system, this is when you do it. Okay, step 12 is actually the end result of all of our work so far. What we're going to do is we're going to create a solution, and we are going to put in that solution anything that we modified along the way. So any of the JavaScript we modified, any of the forms we modified, I kind of skipped past that part, I didn't actually bring it up, but one of the big changes between 4.0 and 2013 you're going to have to get used to is the fact that you're going to have to start using the new entity forms. So when you migrate from 2013 or 2011 to 2013, you're going to have an information form, and then for the main entities, you'll have a form that is the name of the entity, like account or contact, opportunity, etc. You need to be using the new forms, the entity forms, because that's the path into the future for Microsoft. So when you get to 2015, it's going to be very important that you're using those forms. So what has to happen is you have to migrate the forms. Either you can merge them together, which can be a lot of work and is fraught with peril, or you can just redesign them. It really and truly depends on what your level of change is. Okay, so that's one of the big things, which is again part of the whole testing thing. The end result of all of that is we need to create a solution that has anything that we modified. So any of the entities, any of the JavaScript, any web resources, whatever it might be that we're going to modify, we're going to put that into a solution, and we're going to export that as an unmanaged solution. Okay? Now, I'm making you do this because in most cases you cannot export the default solution and import the whole thing back in. It just really truly doesn't work. But you can create a solution that contains all of your changes and then export that out and then import that back in here at the next step. Okay, so we got our 2015 tested. We've got our solution exported. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Deployment Manager. We're going to delete the organization. We're going to detach the SQL database. We're going to move it somewhere else as a backup. Then we're going to restore the 2013 database, run it through the exact same import process we ran through before, and then we're going to test it by importing our solution that we created in step 12. This is to make sure that what we exported can be imported again. That may not be the case depending on how things work within your system, and it's specific to your environment. So what happens is, sometimes, okay, so if I jump back for a second, if I get into the export, a lot of times you'll say, okay, you're missing required components. Well, a required component is really just the fact that it has to be there in the destination system. So if you have, say, a piece of JavaScript that's on the contact and you want to distribute that as a hotfix to your environment as an unmanned solution, it's really easy to just put that into a solution, export it out, but it's going to say, hey, you are missing the contact. So you need to include that. Like, well, no, I don't, because the contact's already there, and I'm okay with that. But if you run into situations where you've missed something in your solution that is required but is not in your solution in the environment you're installing into, it will fail to import. So what you do is you restore the database, you correct the errors, and you repeat steps 12 and 13. And then finally it's at 14 until all of that stuff works. So again, it's just a trial to make sure that you can make modifications to your 2015 database, export that solution with those modifications out, start from scratch on the 2013 import. Once you've imported to 2015, you apply that solution, and if it works properly, you are where you left off at the end of your testing. That's the idea here. And then this is exactly the process we'll be using to import our production database. Okay, so in all the test environments, what we're going to do is basically disable, delete the organization for Deployment Manager, detach and move the database, and that's going to reset everything back so that we start all over again. So this is production. So you come in on whatever day you decide to do this. It's usually on a weekend, I hope, not a Monday morning as somebody I used to work with did. You move from 2011, from 2011 to 2013, from 2013 to 2015, you restore your solution, and then you test the heck out of it. Okay? This will depend, how much time this takes up will depend on the size of your database and all the other things going with it. I recently did one, and I can go from 2011 to 2015 in about 4 hours, 5 hours at the top. And that's for a 56 gigabyte database. Okay, so again, your amounts may vary. If you got a couple hundred gig database, it will of course take longer because there's just more data to move around. And again, testing cannot be underemphasized in this thing at all. The final integration testing is one of those where after you get everything up and running, your solution works and all your UI, then you start plugging things back in. So this is, again, this is production. You plug in the email router, which is going to be a new email router. If you did not know that, it's going to be a new one. Your Outlook client, like if you got Scribe, if you got any custom tools, all of those put back together and make sure they all work together. Okay. I cannot emphasize enough with this the need for testing. Have an excellent testing plan. Have a testing plan you've tested. Does that make sense? Because absolutely you have to have that. And if you can have more than one person doing this, that makes a lot of sense. Also, quite honestly, you need to have the users involved in this because they know how to do the stuff. I mean, the one I just upgraded a couple weekends ago, we actually tested one component during off hours during the week before we did the migration, and we still found errors because they didn't test everything that they thought about. So it's one of those where if you can have a documented testing plan, that's really, really cool. So that is the overall process as most people do it. Now, again, most people is going to vary, again, your miles will vary. An alternative method for this is to really install 2015 and start everything from scratch. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, the business that you started in 2007 or that you ran in 2007 when you installed CRM 4.0 is not the business you have in 2015. Okay, things change. I can't tell you how many customers, and when I say it's not a lot, I mean a handful, but they're starting from scratch. They are literally designing a system that they use today, and they're worrying about the data later. Once they get the system that's laid out and functional the way that they want it, they'll use a tool like Scribe or Kingsway Soft SSIS package to actually move the data from CRM over. Because a lot of people added fields they didn't need. They added, code they didn't use, and it's just sitting all out there and just, hanging up the system and causing errors all the time. It's just more code you have to maintain. So a lot of people are actually going with I'm starting, with the green field. Here's my new CRM system, and then I'll get the data in there based on whatever we end up with. So I know that's kind of quick, and I know it's a lot there, but that is the basis of everything. So who has some things to contribute that I missed? Nobody? Okay. Well, what questions do we have? Oh, Tyler brought up a good one in the earlier QA. He said that you can't just come out the references to the 2007 web services. Oh yeah, when that environment check happens, it looks for all that code. If it sees it, it does it. I have a customer I'm working on right now, and their thing failed because there was code in there wasn't even being used anymore. It was just in there, and we had to go physically remove it because it would not actually pass the upgrade test. So David, going from 2011 on-premise to 2013-50 online, it's not impossible. It is very possible. I don't know exactly what the process is. I do know there is one. So I think the idea is you may have to upgrade it to 2015 on-premise and then give them a backup, like literally physical backup, ship it to them, and I think they install it into their data center. That's how I think it works. Never done it, but I think that. Has anybody ever moved from on-prem to online? If so, well, why don't you tell us how that works? And Tyler asks, how does your approach differ from an upgrade to CRM Online from on-prem? Like I said, I've never actually done it. I just heard people talk about it, but I think the process is you upgrade it first and then move it up there because it's just going to be easier to control because it's yours. So that's it. So Michael asks, basically, did I cover the ribbon bar mess up? It happens often. No, I didn't. That's part of the testing thing. So what you're talking about is the upgrade, say from 2011 to 2013 or something like that, and having the ribbon messed up. No, you're going to have to tackle those one at a time. Again, that's what the testing is for. Like I said, there's all kinds of crazy things that happen. I can't even document all of them. But anything to do with the user interface is going to have to change. So when you go from 4.0 to 2011, it's going to move any custom buttons you have into their own tab called the ISV tab. And those are probably going to be, probably maybe not necessary. A lot of stuff we did in 4.0 was to add functionality to the toolbar that we didn't have. And that those things like, so add a phone call to a record, things like that, add a fax to a record. Those are all covered in the 2013 interface, so that stuff can just go away. Remember, part of the upgrade process is to remove what you don't need, because there's a lot of functionality that's built into the system now. So just because you did create it yourself and you used it does not mean that you have to use it anymore. This may sound strange, but I don't like writing code I have to maintain. So anytime I can remove code from the system, I consider that a win for everyone, because one, I don't have to maintain it, and two, they don't have to worry about it breaking. Let's see, what else we got here? So Debbie asked, how do you handle changes that happen to an ISV solution? The end user has added fields since the solution was provided. That, Debbie, is a stickler. That's going to really depend on the solution and the version of CRM. It can range from hairy to nightmarish. So what happens is, and again, I'm going to say this out loud, it is not in 90% of all cases the fault of the ISV. It's a fault of the way that the solution model was created. And so there are some drawbacks of things, and what will happen is somebody will take an ISV solution, they will modify what was put in, and the next thing you know, the ISV cannot update their solution. That is not their fault. That is either a bug or a design deficiency in the solution model. Okay, they're working to fix those. It's a really complicated problem, and people go through this all the time. It is not pretty. It actually is a bigger deal than you would think. But I know from other ISVs that it's a nightmare sometimes to get their stuff updated, because you go to do it, it's like, oh, you can't update that because of this. I was like, but I didn't do anything. I'm just upgrading my software. Well, I don't like that. I'm like, what don't you like? I don't know. I don't like it. You're wearing a purple shirt. Okay. Now, how do you fix that? Well, you open a case with Microsoft and you have to kind of stomp through things. I had a situation with one of my CRM Online works where I removed an ISV solution. It left a remnant behind. That remnant kept another solution from being imported. Had nothing to do with each other. But what it did, it left a sitemap. And that sitemap was referencing things that didn't exist. And I know it doesn't exist. So I'm going to call. I said, okay, you need to go fix my database. There's something wrong in there. What do you mean? I was like, well, there's something left in the database as an artifact. I know it's in there. I can't see it because, I don't have SQL access, but you're going to have to do this. And, I finally got a hold of the right person. I'm sure most of you open cases of what I'm talking about, but I finally got a hold of the right person. It's like, yeah, we found what you're talking about. And what had happened is when the solution was deinstalled, the sitemap record for that solution was left in place. And then what happened is when the second ISV solution went to be installed, it took its sitemap and it was merging them all together, and the orphan sitemap was trying to be merged in at the same time, and it was referencing things that no longer existed, and therefore the whole process failed. Okay, so not a great experience for anybody. I'm a one-man show, so when I can't get into CRM, and I have to spend hours working on it, that doesn't make me any money. So it's very frustrating, and I know everybody's like that. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. Well, I really appreciate you coming along today for the ride, and thanks for the great questions. If you do have any more questions, then please feel free to drop me an email or send me on Twitter or whatever it might be, or on my blog. And like I said, this recording will be up later today. And if you got any other things pop up, then let me know. If you're going to CRM UG Summit, I will be there. I may go to Extreme. I'm still trying to work out the budgetary thing on that. But if you're at CRM UG, please look me up and say hi. Thanks a lot, everybody. I'll talk to you later.